The new CEO fired me on his first day. He walked into the building like he already owned it. New suit, leather briefcase, that smile people wear when they think they have finally arrived. He shook hands with the receptionist, nodded at a few people in the hallway, and then he saw me. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask my name. He just looked at me the way people look at something they want removed and said, "You, pack your things. You are done here." I looked at him, calm, and I said, "I will be in the conference room if you need me." He thought I was being difficult. He had no idea I owned 74% of the company he had just been hired to run. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story did not start that morning. It started 21 years ago in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. My name is Richard Holloway. I was 26 years old when I founded Meridian Systems, a logistics and supply chain software company. Back then, it was just me, a second-hand laptop, and an idea that I could not get out of my head. The first 3 years were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, I ate cheap food, I slept on a cot in the office more nights than I care to remember. My girlfriend at the time left me because she said I cared more about the company than about her. She was not wrong, but slowly, painfully, it started to work. Small clients first, then bigger ones. By year 5, we had 40 employees and our first major contract with a national retail chain. By year 10, Meridian Systems had 3 offices, 230 employees, and revenues pushing $40 million a year. Then came the decision that would change everything. In year 14, the board convinced me to bring in outside capital. We needed to scale faster. The software market was moving, and we had to move with it. I agreed. We ran a funding round, brought in institutional investors, and in exchange I diluted my stake. But I was careful. I was very, very careful. My lawyer, a quiet woman named Patricia Chen, who had been with me since year 2, made sure that my shares came with specific governance rights. No matter how much the company grew, no matter how many investors came in, certain decisions required my direct approval. And my 74% ownership stake was protected by a clause that could not be undone without my signature. The investors knew this. They agreed to it. It was all in the paperwork. What they apparently forgot to mention to the new CEO. His name was Victor Hale, 43 years old, MBA from a top school, track record of turning around mid-sized companies. The board had recruited him 6 months earlier while I was managing a serious health issue. A cardiac episode that had forced me to step back from day-to-day operations. During my recovery, the board had more control than usual. I trusted them. I had known most of them for over a decade. What I did not realize was that in the process of recruiting Victor, someone had given him a very incomplete picture of who I was. He knew I was a founder. He knew I was on medical leave. I think someone let him believe I was on my way out. So when he walked in on day 1 with his leather briefcase and his new hire confidence, he had already decided the company needed a clean break from the past. And I was the past. He called HR within the first hour, had them pull my employee file, looked at my title, which at that point simply said senior advisor, because I had stepped back and decided I was a redundant position. The HR director, a woman named Sandra who had been with me for 11 years, came to find me with the palest face I had ever seen on her. She handed me the termination letter personally. Her hands were shaking slightly. I read it, put it on the desk, thanked her, and told her not to worry. Then I called Patricia Chen. Patricia answered on the second ring. I read her the termination letter out loud. There was a long silence on her end. Then she said, "Richard, does he know?" I said, "Apparently not." Another silence. And then, very quietly, she started to laugh. Not a cruel laugh. More the laugh of someone watching a very complicated chess game reach a completely inevitable conclusion. She told me not to respond to anyone, not to clear my desk, not to sign anything. She said she would make some calls and that I should be in the conference room at 2 o'clock. I said, I already told him I would be there. By 11 that morning, 4 of the 7 board members had received calls from Patricia's office. By noon, 2 of them had driven to the building personally. I know this because Sandra kept me informed. She sat across from me in the break room, drinking terrible coffee, and quietly told me everything that was happening 2 floors above us. Victor had been called into an emergency meeting. She said she could hear the voices through the walls. One of the board members, a man named Gerald, who had been with me since the first funding round, was apparently not speaking quietly. I drank my coffee. I waited. At 2 o'clock, I walked into the conference room. Victor was already there. 3 board members were present. Patricia was on the phone, on speaker in the corner. Victor looked at me the way people look when they suddenly realize they may have made a very serious mistake. That expression, that exact moment when confidence becomes uncertainty, I will not pretend I did not enjoy it. Gerald spoke first. He said, "Richard, we want to apologize for the confusion this morning." I said there was no confusion. I said that Victor had made a decision, and I respected that he felt empowered to make it. Then Patricia's voice came from the corner. "Victor, would you like to explain to Richard what you have learned in the last 3 hours?" Victor Hale was not a stupid man. He had spent the morning going through documents. He had talked to the legal team. He now understood with complete clarity exactly who was sitting across the table from him. He said, "Mr. Holloway, I was not given complete information when I accepted this position." I said, "No, it seems you were not." He said, "You own 74% of the voting shares." I said, "I do." He said, "And my contract." Patricia finished his sentence. "Requires the approval of the majority shareholder," which would be Richard, whose termination letter, incidentally, is not valid because his employment terms also require board approval and shareholder consent, which were not obtained. The room was very quiet. I want to be honest with you. I did not enjoy what came next as much as you might expect. Victor Hale was not a bad person. He had been put in an impossible position by people who had not been fully honest with him. He had made a mistake, yes, a significant one, but it came from incomplete information, not malice. I said as much in that conference room. I told the board that I held them responsible for the situation, not Victor. That someone in their recruitment process had been careless at best and deliberately deceptive at worst. I wanted to know which one it was. What followed was a very uncomfortable 2 hours of conversation that I will not detail here. What I will say is that 1 board member resigned before the end of the week, and the remaining 6 agreed that a full restructuring of the board's operating procedures was necessary. Victor and I had a private conversation after the board meeting. He asked me what I wanted to happen. He was direct about it, which I respected. I told him the truth. I said I had spent 21 years building that company. I had nearly died for it, literally, with the cardiac episode. I was not going to disappear from it because someone had waved a termination letter in my direction. But I also told him that the reason I had stepped back was real. My health was real. I could not run day-to-day operations the way I once could. I needed someone to do that. And if he was as good as his record suggested, maybe that person could be him, under very different terms than he had been sold. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What would those terms look like?" We spent the next 3 weeks restructuring everything. Victor stayed on as CEO, but with full transparency about the ownership structure from day one. Patricia drafted new governance documents that made everything explicit. No more assuming, no more incomplete briefings. I returned as executive chairman, not a ceremonial title, a real one. I attended board meetings. I had final say on major strategic decisions. I was present. And something unexpected happened. Victor was good, genuinely good. He saw the business with fresh eyes. He identified 3 operational inefficiencies I had been too close to the company to notice. He brought in 2 new clients in his first quarter that together were worth more than $8 million in annual revenue. We were different people with different styles, but we worked. I have thought about that morning many times since. The moment he pointed at me in the hallway and said, "You are done here." The absolute certainty in his voice, the way he had already decided, before he knew anything about me, that I was someone who could be dismissed. I think about it not with anger anymore, but with something closer to understanding. We all make assumptions. We all walk into rooms and think we know who has power and who does not. We read the signals, the title on a business card, the age of someone's face, the simplicity of their desk, and we make our judgments. Sometimes we are right. Sometimes the person you dismiss is exactly who you think they are, and sometimes they own 74% of the company. Meridian Systems today has over 600 employees. We expanded into 3 new markets last year. Victor and I have worked together for 4 years now, and I consider him a genuine partner. He tells the story sometimes at industry events about the day he tried to fire the man who owned the company. He tells it better than I do, honestly. He makes himself the fool in it, which I think takes a kind of courage. I do not tell it often. But when I do, I always end it the same way. Be careful who you dismiss. Be careful who you assume has no power. Because in business, in life, the person sitting quietly across from you might just be holding all the cards. They're just waiting to see if you are worth showing them to. If you have experienced something like this, a moment when someone underestimated you, or a time when the truth changed everything, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, you already know what to do.